In a quiet village in the middle of West Africa, a baby boy was born. Babies are born every day. But this baby would grow up to lead one of the most successful countries in Africa after the end of colonial rule. He would also become one of the richest men in the world, and he did it all by growing cocoa beans. His name was Félix Houphouët-Boigny. He was the son of a chief and came from a rich family that owned big plantations. He belonged to the Béoul people. At that time, their land became part of a French colony called Côte d'Ivoire, or Ivory Coast, as we usually call it. As a smart young boy, he studied hard in the French schools. He went to Dakar to study medicine. After finishing, he came back home and worked as a doctor for 15 years. Later, he became the chief of his area. But even then, the real power stayed with the French officers. Félix liked the French. He thought they were good rulers and he loved their culture. But one French policy made him angry. They used forced labor. In 1944, he started a group called the African Agricultural Syndicate. The goal was to protect local farmers from bad French rules. He asked for fair prices and easier work for farmers. This group became very popular in a country where most people worked in farming. Félix used the success of this group to build the first real political party in the country, the Democratic Party of the Ivory Coast, or PDCI. Soon he was elected to France's National Assembly. While in Paris, he made a smart change to his name. He added Boigny at the end. In his local language, it means battering ram, like a strong force that breaks through walls. That is how the world knows him today. Félix Houphouët-Boigny, his first big win came in 1946. He helped pass a new law that ended forced labor in all French colonies. People back home loved him for this. They sang songs about him and put his picture everywhere. He became a hero. By the 1950s, he became the first African to serve as a cabinet minister in the French government. He was France's best friend in Africa. Even though he helped start African independence, Félix always said he wanted the French to stay. The French also wanted to keep control of the resources. But everything changed after the terrible war in Algeria. That war cost many lives and shocked France. It brought down the old French government and brought back the war hero Charles de Gaulle as leader. One of de Gaulle's first moves was to let every African colony vote. Stay with France or become independent? Félix campaigned hard for, yes, stay with France. He even warned that anyone who voted no should pack their bags and leave in 24 hours. Most people voted yes. Only Guinea said no. Still, by 1960, France agreed to give independence. On August 7, 1960, Ivory Coast became free. Félix was the only candidate, so he became the first president. Félix knew it would not be easy. He said the French left him a state, but not a real nation. There were about 60 different ethnic groups. The South was mostly Christian and rich in farms. The North was mostly Muslim and drier. To keep peace, he decided to run the country as a one-party state. He believed that if many parties fought in elections, it would turn into fights between tribes and religions. Many other new African leaders thought the same way. But Félix was different in one important way. He did not just want power, he wanted real results. He focused on making the economy grow instead of chasing big ideas about total independence. He did two smart things most other leaders did not do. First, he welcomed European businessmen and their money. Second, he did not try to force the country to build factories quickly. When most African countries became independent, many white people left. But in Ivory Coast, the number of French people actually grew 5 times bigger. About 50,000 French experts came. They were doctors, engineers, bankers, and advisors. He also welcomed poor workers from northern countries like Burkina Faso. Many came to work on farms, and some even got their own land if they worked hard. Today, about 1/3 of the people in Ivory Coast are migrants or have family from other countries. Ivory Coast became a place people wanted to move to. Why did this work? Because Félix did not waste money trying to build factories too fast like other countries. Many African nations stopped buying foreign goods to push local factories. But the people did not have the skills or tools yet, so everything became short, medicine, tools, even simple things. This made life harder. Ivory Coast had great land for growing crops like coffee, palm oil, and especially cocoa. The government gave farmers many helps, guaranteed good prices from France, cash bonuses, and tax breaks for new farms. Ghana, their big rival, focused on big government farms and ignored small farmers. So Ghana's cocoa production dropped. Many Ghanaian farmers even smuggled their cocoa into Ivory Coast to get better prices. Because of this, cocoa production in Ivory Coast tripled and coffee doubled. After World War II, the world wanted more chocolate. Thanks to good policies and open business, Ivory Coast became an African success story based on farming. From the 1960s to the 1980s, the economy grew by 7.3% every year on average. That was much better than Senegal 2.5% or Ghana 0.1%. Ivory Coast became the world's biggest producer of cocoa beans. Almost half of all cocoa in the world still comes from there today. And guess who was the biggest cocoa farmer in the whole country? Félix Houphouët-Boigny himself. He never hid it. In one speech, he proudly said he was also the biggest producer of pineapples and avocados. He said he kept his money in Swiss banks because he earned it from farming, not by stealing from the government. He even joked that he had a quarter of all the money in the banks of Abidjan, the business capital. He ran the country with a system called patronage. He gave government jobs to many people, even some rivals, so they could share in the cocoa money. He used extra money to build roads, schools, hospitals, and help poorer areas in the north. Of course, he gave more to his friends, but many people still got something. A French report later found that about 10% of the cocoa money went into his own accounts, worth around $11 billion. But because ordinary people saw real improvements, new paved roads, better electricity from new dams, nicer schools and hospitals, a busy new port in San Pedro, and tall buildings in Abidjan, most people accepted his rule. Félix was a quiet, short, soft-spoken man. He did not like being in the spotlight. Yet he won 7 five-year terms as president. Only one election allowed other parties. His party, the PDCI, had people everywhere, in every shop, farm, and street, reporting back to Papa Houphouët. People still sang and danced for him when he visited villages. As long as life was getting better, many accepted his strong control and the corruption. In the early years, he arrested people who planned even 6 cabinet ministers and 5 founders of his own party. 20 were sentenced to death, but only 1 was executed. He preferred to send them to hard labor instead, to look kinder. Later, he became more relaxed. He spent a lot of time in Paris and Switzerland. Some people called him a neo-colonialist or a puppet of France because he kept close ties with them. But Félix saw himself as a rich landowner, not a revolutionary. One big example of his wealth. After dinner with Tunisia's old leader, he decided to turn his small hometown, Yamoussoukro, into a grand new capital. He built wide 6-lane roads, tall buildings, hotels, and an artificial lake with crocodiles. In the middle, he built one of the largest churches in the world, the Basilica of Our Lady of Peace. It is bigger outside than any other basilica and can hold 300,000 people. It looks amazing with huge columns, a big dome, and beautiful glass windows. One window even shows Félix kneeling next to Jesus, but this project became a symbol of waste. The basilica alone cost about $500 million, and the whole new capital cost $2 billion. It took up 1/3 of the money meant for all regions outside Abidjan. The city was built more for rich people than for normal families. Even today, Abidjan has 30 times more people than Yamoussoukro. People might have accepted it if the good times had continued. But 3 big problems changed everything. First, the cocoa prices crashed. In the 1980s, countries like Brazil, Ecuador, and Indonesia started growing more cocoa. Chocolate companies pushed prices down. Ivory Coast had promised farmers good minimum prices for years. So the government kept paying farmers even when prices fell, borrowing money to do it. Prices stayed very low for decades. In 1988, Félix tried to boycott the world market to force higher prices. The boycott lasted only 18 months. No other country joined. When they checked the special cocoa fund for emergencies, it was already empty. The government went broke. They had to cut services. Farmers' incomes dropped by half. They had to accept help from the IMF. At the worst time, even government workers did not get paid. To earn more, they pushed even more cocoa farming. This caused a lot of illegal cutting of forests. Since 1990, Ivory Coast has lost more forests than any other country. This anger led to the second problem. In 1990, people protested against Félix's long rule and his rich lifestyle. A history teacher named Laurent Gbagbo led the protests. Félix first called them drug addicts, but he finally agreed to allow other parties. In the first open election, he still won 82% of the votes. But opening politics brought trouble. It helped start 2 civil wars later. Third problem. Félix himself died in 1993 after 33 years in power. He was the last of the big independence leaders and the longest ruling leader in Africa at that time. He wanted economic growth more than full democracy, and in that goal, he succeeded. He also lived a very comfortable life. After his death, 2 men wanted to replace him. One was Prime Minister Alassane Ouattara. The other was Henry Konan Bedi, who became president. Both were smart economists with PhDs, but the economy was now weak and people were unhappy. Bedi blamed all problems on immigrants. He created a policy called Ivory that separated real Ivorians from people with foreign roots. This later turned against Muslims and northern people, even those who had lived there for centuries. Many lost their right to vote or even their citizenship. Ouattara, who had family from Burkina Faso, was banned from running for president. The country turned against almost 40% of its people, mostly in the north. This created deep anger. In 1999, there was a military coup. Then in 2000, Gbagbo, the man who had led protests against Félix, won the election. But he kept the Ivory rules. In 2002, the army split and a civil war began. The country was divided, north against south. It was a simple war map. Rebels in the north, called New Forces, against the government in the south. Both sides used cocoa money to buy weapons. The South added many new taxes on cocoa. The North blocked cocoa from moving south. This may have been the only civil war in the world mostly paid for by chocolate. After thousands died, they made a weak peace in 2007. But in 2010, another election caused 5 more months of fighting. Gbagbo and Ouattara both claimed they won. Gbagbo's side killed and tortured suspected opponents. He stole from the cocoa fund. Finally, French forces helped catch him and he went to prison. Ouattara has been president since then. His party is called the Rally of Houphouëtists for Democracy and Peace. They keep winning big, just like Félix did. Under Ouattara, the country has become more stable and is growing again. Average income is rising, though it has not reached the high levels of the 1970s yet. Part of the reason is peace. Another part is that cocoa prices became extremely high in recent years. That is why chocolate has become more expensive worldwide, and some chocolate bars now have less real chocolate. Ivory Coast still produces nearly half the world's cocoa, but today they are trying to do more. They now make cocoa butter, cocoa paste, and even finished chocolate. Selling only raw beans gives very little money compared to making the final product. Is Ouattara another Félix? Probably not. He is already 84 years old and on his 4th term, even though the law says only 2 terms. Both men come from royal families. Both ruled during good cocoa prices and growth. Both are hard to remove from power. But when it comes to turning a new country into a real success story, there is still no one like Félix Houphouët-Boigny. If you like this video, please subscribe. Check out my other video. Like this video if you learn something new about Africa's hidden success stories. Tell me in the comments, would you trade some political fray?